Welcome, everyone. My clock has struck noon here in Chicago, so we are going to get started with our conversation with the brilliant and visionary Mila Skinner, who will be teaching at the Graham School this autumn a course on recognition, realization, and reflection on race in America. I'm Seth Green, and on an afternoon like this one, I'm especially privileged to say that I am the Dean of the Graham School. And for those of you who are not familiar, first with our great university, I'm bringing you virtually into our space. It is actually as beautiful today as it looks in this image. It is a gorgeous day here in Chicago for those of you who are Zooming from around the country or the world. For those who are not familiar with Graham in particular, we are now 130 years into our mission of bringing lifelong learning from the university to all. Indeed, in October of 1892, we started our first classes, and so we're very pleased to be coming to that 130th anniversary of trailblazing new paths in lifelong learning. Today, what that learning looks like is fourfold. We have a Master of Liberal Arts that is among the most respected and rigorous in the world. We have a basic program of liberal education for adults where you can go deep into the Socratic tradition. We have open enrollment, which allows you to explore across all of the disciplines of the university. And then we have annual programs that allow you to better know our city of Chicago and to look into the future of museum publishing. We are going to have our conversation today with Mila Skinner, and I'll just briefly share that she is the founder and managing partner of Quarter 5, which is an organization that works with organizations and businesses as they navigate complex and consequential change, including opportunities around strategy, leadership, transitions, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. She provides executive and leadership coaching and development as well. Prior to starting Quarter 5 in 2020, she has held multiple leadership positions in nonprofits across the city, including CARA Chicago and One Goal. And she was once a part of our team here at the University of Chicago and now is rejoining that team in a certain adjunct sense. And finally, I'll just share her educational background includes an MBA from Loyola University, Chicago. Myla, it's wonderful to have you here. And I'm going to leave my screen up just for one more moment because I wanted to share this quote and I wanted people to be able to read it and really absorb it because I know for you, this is the motivation behind your design of this upcoming course. And so I'll read it from Lila Watson, but I'll allow you to do the same. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And I'm curious if we can start, Myla, by just having you share a little bit about what this quote means to you and how it motivated you to endeavor this upcoming course. And I'll now take down my screen and spotlight so you can actually be seen by our group.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Seth. First and foremost, I am so excited to be here with you all and to have this conversation with you, Seth. Thank you for the amazing opportunity to be an instructor at Graham. I did not have that on my list of things to do in my career, but when the opportunity was presented and the opportunity to build a course like this one, I couldn't pass it up. So about the quote, why this quote means so much to me is because at the end of the day, what I most believe in is the humanity of all of us and how that humanity ties us and binds us together. And I believe deeply, if one of us are not liberated, then none of us are liberated. And the idea behind this is that if individuals can see each other's wholeness, if we can lean into one another, if we can work to remove bias and stereotypes that exist in our world and in our thinking and in our ways of engaging, then we are liberating one another. There is a word that is being used quite a bit now, allyship. And how can people show up as allies? I only believe that allyship works when individuals understand that it is their liberation that they are working towards as well, not just trying to push liberation on or for me. And so I think that quote just speaks so clearly to this is the work of all of us, not just the work of a few or even many, but we all must be working towards this idea of liberation together.
Well, so that is a very powerful why, so to speak, behind your course. I want to talk a little bit about the what of this course. So if you're
Yes.
aiming to inspire internal reflection and the ultimate goal of liberation, what's the learning journey of the course and how did you choose the readings along the way?
Absolutely. So I want to actually give a little bit of definition on things because we all use these words: recognition, realization, reflection. And you know, as an MBA student once, I'm very big on defining the words. What do they actually mean? And so recognition is the identification or acknowledgement of something's existence. Realization is the act of becoming fully aware of something as fact, and reflection is serious thought or consideration. So these words were chosen with a great deal of intentionality. And what this class is, what this course is it's a journey. We are all on a journey. We should all be on a journey. Ideally, we are working towards an anti-racist journey, but the journey is a long and slow one, but it is one that cannot be done or attained without really understanding from whence many of the ways in which we engage, the ways that our society is structured, our systems are created, are steeped in deep and long-term racism. Policies have been created. One of the books that we'll read in the class, The Warmth of Other Suns, talks about the Great Migration and how many, I see you, Yvonne, I can tell you love that book. Yes, and so this book goes deep into the history and the understanding of the Great Migration when millions of families from the South moved to other parts of the country, so Chicago, New York, California, and so on, and how in response to that movement of mass amounts of people of color, Black people, laws were created to ensure that there were structures and systems that continued to live into this racial hierarchy that exists. And so for this course, we'll navigate through that journey. So we'll talk about the history of slavery and racism and where it started, the idea of othering, and how we have systemically pushed a certain group of people out of society. And then we'll talk about conversations related to how this impacts us as individuals, not just Black people, but white people and other people of color, women and men, how this system has perpetuated racism and the complexity that exists because of it. We'll talk about power and privilege and how that informs how we engage with one another, how we look at ourselves, and how that informs how we engage with the world around us. So it's really meant to be, again, it's part of a large journey that we'll all go through, but this class is very much a journey in understanding history, but also how it then impacts who we are as individuals and how we engage with the world.
So I want to begin jumping into the course contents.
Absolutely.
And, you know, this is a really challenging topic to dialogue about. Obviously, we know that as a country, and, you know, we're at a time where it may be, I mean, it's never been easy, but it's become in some ways more difficult for a variety of reasons. And so I'm curious just to, you know, start out with you in this journey. How will you try to set up your classroom so that people can bring all of their different perspectives in the name of open exchange? How will you kind of have a room where people that have such different experiences with this are able to dialogue? And I know you're starting with a book, so you want to talk about race, which sounds like a book that might have some topical relevance to that. Just talk a little bit about maybe that book and how you're kind of endeavoring to structure dialogue in this really kind of contested and challenging space.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking that question, Seth. I started off this conversation saying that the thing I care most about is humanity. And so everyone who comes into this course, we will engage as humans first. I want this to be a place that feels, I don't love the word safe. I far more prefer the word brave. And I can talk about that in a minute and why I choose that language. But I want this to be a place where some of the questions that you want to ask that you don't always feel comfortable asking can be asked and really worked through, not just answered, but worked through. What was the thought behind the question? What are your experiences that lead to that question and that wondering? I think what has happened, and you referenced this a moment ago, is race has for so long divided us and our humanity. And this is an opportunity for us to engage in conversation so that we can see one another, so that we can hear one another, so that we can understand one another. I had someone ask me, well, is this a class for Black people? Is this a class for white people? This is a class for all people, right? This is meant to be a place in which we engage in really deep, meaningful conversation that challenges us, that challenges our thinking, that challenges the language that we have used and the things that we have been taught. That is not meant to say it is wrong or right. It is meant to examine it. It's meant to really delve into it, and not just through me, right? I think the most beautiful thing that will happen and can happen in this class is what we learn from one another and how we talk about language and how it impacts and affects each one of us differently, and how we better understand, again, how systemic oppression and racism doesn't just impact Black people, it impacts all people. And so I want to create a space in which we feel brave. And so why do I use the word brave? In academia, it's come up quite a bit, and I know you know this, Seth, of this language of safe spaces, right? We want to create psychological safety so people can say what they want to say. And I think that's brilliant and beautiful, and I want to create that. But beyond that, I want to create what I consider brave spaces. So there is this language about safe spaces and brave spaces. And brave spaces are still about having safety and saying what you believe and kind of your foundation of your thinking. But they also are a space for what I like to call calling in and asking more questions. And I think that that is the thing that has historically divided us, is that people can say things and no one has an opportunity to ask more about it. We fight about it, we hurt each other over it, but we don't get to talk about it in real ways that are mindful of what someone's truth is and what my truth is, and to honor both. I believe that one of the most distinct things about being anti-racist is not getting stuck in binaries, that things have to be either or, but they can be both and. And so how do we use this space to say that one person has a belief that they hold true, that is their perspective and their truth. I have a different belief that I hold true, it is my perspective and my truth, and still have the space to see one another.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And I want to acknowledge this is something that, just as the Graham School and at the university, really interests us from the perspective of constant discovery, right? Because what happens when we create those brave spaces and we have open exchange is that possibility that we can discover new knowledge. And there are other courses, for example, coming up this autumn, America's Contested History, where students in that class are reading the 1619 Project, they're reading a more conservative memoir in history, and they're trying to wrestle with, and not everyone will come out in the same place, but everyone will have examined all of these with seriousness and been able to come out in a better place because they were true to themselves ultimately, because they've heard all of the perspectives in that exchange. So
absolutely,
just, acknowledging and affirming.
Yeah, and that's why we talk about this as a journey, right? So
Right.
Any journey we go on, people are at different places of that journey. You may just be starting and someone else is further along, and that is okay. And so for me, this is both a meet people where they are, but to have a stretch, right? One of the norms, and that's something that we'll do in this course, is create a set of norms together, right? One of the norms, and why do I do norms, is because it gives us a foundation for how we will engage with one another. One of the norms that I always live into is that perfection is not what we are seeking, right? So there is no perfect in this. So what we are trying to do, what we're going to aim to do in this course, is to do better, know more, get better, learn more, and truly, again, deeply engage with one another. My hope in this space is that it is more than just an academic experience where people read books and then come into the space and reflect what they read and share what they read, but that they are able to take these readings and internalize them. Say, what does this mean for me as a Black woman, as a white man, as an Asian woman, as an Indian human, right? Like, how does this inform how the world around me operates and how I operate within the world?
Well, so, your kind of core structure is around kind of having this reading, right? The recognition of these issues and then coming into reflection. I want to talk now about some of the readings themselves. And, you have W.B. Du Bois in there. You have just many of the kind of foundational texts. Can you maybe talk about a couple of the texts and why you decided to put them in? And I know that each person will take away, what they decide, but maybe a little bit about what you imagine they might take away from some of these texts.
Absolutely. So I varied the text quite a bit, right? So some of the text is very, again, staunch in history. Some of it is far more narrative in its approach. So if we think about, I've got all my texts over here. So if we think about The Origin of Others by Toni Morrison, right? It is far more narrative in our approach. And if you've ever read anything by Toni Morrison, you know she is a beautiful storyteller. And so she takes these stories and helps to illuminate for people the experience. This idea of the origin of others is the language of othering, right? And when we talk about racism and race, it is about othering. In The Warmth of Other Suns, which is what I just referenced by Isabel Wilkerson, she talks about the Great Migration. And I actually would just take a second and I marked a section in here because I thought it was important. I wanted to just read this with you all. Is over the course of 6 decades, some 6 million Black Southerners left the land of their forefathers and fanned out across the country for an uncertain existence in nearly every other corner of America. The Great Migration would become a turning point in history. It would transform urban America and recast the social and political order of every city it touched. It would force the South to search its soul and finally to lay aside a feudal caste system. It grew out of the unmet promises made after the Civil War, and through the sheer weight of it, helped push the country toward the civil rights revolutions of the 1960s. And so this is a beautiful story that both combines narrative. Isabel Wilkerson interviewed over 1,200 people to build this book, but it also combines so much fact and data about what the Great Migration meant for this country, both the South and the North. One of the other books that we will engage in, which I know is a very popular one, and he's a very popular author, is Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. And out of this one, racism, I'll read another excerpt. Racism, the need to ascribe bone-deep features to people and then humiliate, reduce, and destroy them, inevitably follows an unalterable condition. In this way, racism is rendered as the innocent daughter of Mother Nature, and one is left to deplore the Middle Passage, so the time in which African Americans were enslaved, brought from Africa to this country, or the Trail of Tears, the way one deplores an earthquake, a tornado, or any other phenomenon that can be cast as beyond the handiwork of men. But race is the child of racism, not the father. And the process of naming the people has never been a matter of genealogy or physiognomy, my language, so much as one of hierarchy. And so I think, this language, the narratives of these books, the stories, are really intended to both bring people into the facts of racism, the data, right? So you at UChicago love data, a very quant-based academic institution. So we'll get a lot of that, but we'll also get the qualitative, the stories, the narrative, the experience. I think so much of how we learn and grow together is through storytelling. And I'm hopeful that the books that we use both provide the story and allow for others in this course to unlock their stories and share their stories, while also using facts to inform what has happened in our country and how that challenges all of us.
Well, so I know your course builds right up to the present day, and Coates reading is moving us in that direction. And your readings also, I mean, I just want to say this as a white male to kind of put it into the virtual room here. They might initially spark reaction, right? There's a book on your syllabus, White Rage, White Fragility. I want to just kind of hear from you about the kind of why behind those readings, but also how you will approach them, because I know that you're someone who calls people in and who I mean, both of those are true statements, right? I mean, from an empirical basis, we know that psychologically that is a real phenomenon in terms of the rage and how that is manifest. We know that there is fragility of every identity, including for white people, right? So there's a truth to it, but then how you approach it and call people in as you're kind of introducing this. So I guess a little bit more about the content and then how you approach those texts that are very current and very much bringing us into this kind of contested space of today.
Yeah. So I have always been one that works really hard to be mindful of the language I use. And I recognize that some of the text, whether it's white rage or white fragility, can be jarring for people, right? Even when we talk about white supremacy, white norms, white dominant culture, et cetera, all of those can feel hard for people to hear, specifically when individuals, white individuals, are working so thoughtfully and intentionally to, alongside others, to dismantle the systems of racial hierarchy that exist in this country and across the world. These readings, that language, is not intended, from my part, to call anyone out. So you talked about this notion of calling in and calling out. For me, it is about, in order for us to go through this journey together, we do need to acknowledge where some of our obstacles exist, right? Racial hierarchy has meant that ultimately there are sets of individuals in this world, just by pure existence, by being white, have been placed in a more supreme place than people of color, Black people in particular. And so we need to name that. We need to just name that. And we need to call each other into that. We need to acknowledge what that means when you are born in this country and you are a white man versus being a Black woman. What are the systemic barriers that exist when I want to buy a home versus when a white man wants to buy a home in a particular neighborhood? And we need to name those things, not out of what Brene Brown talks about, not to shame anyone. My goal in this course is not about shame, but we should all be ashamed. And I want us to all be ashamed about what is happening and has happened in this country, so that we can work together to move forward. And so one of the things that, again, I want to occur in this class, and I wouldn't feel it was a success if this didn't happen, is if my white peers, my white brothers and sisters, and my Black brothers and sisters, and every other race, demographic, identity, aren't able to come as their whole selves, to push one another, to pull one another. I expect some tears. I'll probably have some tears myself. And that's okay. That means that we're getting to the root, right? This is not a surface level class. This is not for someone who just wants to come in, read a few books and say, now I understand about the Great Migration. But it is for someone who deeply wants to understand, how does white rage inform how systems of oppression stay in place, right? How does the fear of losing privilege and power inform decisions that are made that impact communities of color? And you can't always see it. Sometimes you don't see it. It's not always a straight line. It's meant to be murky. I had a colleague who used to say the system isn't broken. The system is doing exactly what it was set up to do. I am interested in breaking the system. And that doesn't mean that I am interested in no longer having police. That doesn't mean I'm no longer interested in justice, right? But I am very much interested in us figuring out how we do things in ways that don't overburden, over oppress individuals of color.
So we have a question from the audience. Will you address how the left and right media engage in and sustain the foreigner in their own country psychological warfare against?
Can you say that one more time for me, Seth?
Yep. Will you address how the left and right media engage in and sustain the quote foreigner in their own country psychological warfare against centuries-long Latino American citizens? And maybe that's a good entry point to just how you see, while this is focused on the Black experience, how you see this consciousness and exploration maybe helping people to deepen their kind of general mindset and consciousness around, kind of all of the, lived identities out there.
Absolutely. So I'll give an example. I remember, and no matter where you sit on this, this is not meant to be a polarizing statement by any stretch of the imagination. I remember on January 6th, I was working for the organization I used to work for, and I intentionally turned off CNN and MSNBC, and I went to Fox News. And CNN and MSNBC was showing people breaking into the Capitol, throwing chairs, it was scary, I guess is the best word I can use. And then I flipped over to Fox News, and Fox News was showing, people just walking around, kind of meandering and connecting with one another. And I think that whatever you believe about January 6th, it is an example of, to the point of this question, how the media does seek, whether inadvertently or directly, to pull us further apart, right? To have us stand on one side or the other of this conversation. And in my mind, there is not a one side or the other, right? There is a side that should believe that at the end of the day, every human that exists in this country has a right to the same thing that every other human does, without a belief that they are less than, that they should be destroyed, that they should be eliminated, that they should have less access to something. And I caution us when we use the media as our reference point without picking up the books, because it can inform how we see so many things, specifically to this question of what's happening in our country with individuals who are Latino, Hispanic, brown, however you want to define. We are seeing one side of a story when the story is so much more vast, right? And I think it is our responsibility to do the learning, to do the understanding, to see what is driving where we are as a country, and not be stuck in because CNN said it or because Fox News said it. And I think that is our responsibility. And I do want to juxtapose what we are seeing in the media with what we are reading in the books in this class, because I think we'll hear different stories and narratives that might illuminate a lot for us.
We've continued to get questions in the chat, and I'll share the next one from Ira Pilchin. I am 100% in your corner on these issues, but I wonder whether we are preaching to the choir. How do we reach many people out there who are less educated or less worldly? How in general would you respond to those who mean well but sincerely hold views that many of us now find to be racist? And I'm curious, how do you see literary writings and literature and the empathy approach that I see you taking as part of this, reflection and ultimately, personal transformation as you go through that reflection? I'm curious for you to just talk a little bit about that, strategy, because I know one of the reasons, I mean, just to say out loud, that we talked about you're teaching this is that there are a lot of trainings out there, and certainly we support those trainings, but we also are cognizant that many people haven't gone through almost the prerequisite growth to recognize and reflect on this issue before they get trained to be an ally. And so without that, requisite kind of recognition, they don't necessarily feel the urgency. So they're in that
Yeah.
training, but they're not feeling like this is something that I really want to do because I have come on my own journey to deeply understand the problem and my role in it and my connection to it. So I know I've said more than I meant to. It's a question ultimately, but talk about how you view transformation in a space where people are in their corners and where we could end up
Yeah.
just preaching to the choir.
Yeah. I love that question. Ira, thank you so much for that question. I had that conversation, Seth and I had this conversation, and in both my professional life, my work, my personal life and work, and now as an instructor, I don't want to talk to people who believe the same thing I believe. We don't get any further if we're just talking to the same people, right? It becomes this echo chamber of everyone saying the same thing about the same problems, and we can't grow in that, right? So we only grow in discomfort. So I expect this class to get uncomfortable, right? I actually do. And I want people to be in this class who are so uncomfortable with the idea of talking about race. Seth and I, again, I hope this is okay to share, Seth, but I'm going to share it anyways, even if it's not, is we talked about, like, I need and want white people in this class, right? Like, it matters. We have a society and a system right now, again, with everything that has transpired in our country, not just in the last 2 or 3 years with the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so on, but we have a history of racial trauma that is experienced by all of us in this country. And what has happened, both because of media, because of access to information, because of racial reckoning, is this segmentation, this I'm over here and you're over there. You don't know the Black experience. It's not my responsibility to teach you the Black experience. You should understand what racism is. I shouldn't have to teach you about racism. Google it, read about it. Yes, and yes. And if we do not start having these conversations together, if we do not start pushing each other and challenging one another's views, we will not move forward, right? And when I say challenge each other's views, that doesn't mean that we're in full-on argument. That's not what we're seeking to do. That's not what we will do in this class. But we will say, I read this piece out of The Warmth of Other Suns, and it makes no sense to me. Why would someone choose to leave an area of the country where they were now free, right? Let's just say that's a conversation that comes up. Then it is our responsibility together in this class to engage in that conversation. So I don't want to preach to the choir. My friends and colleagues who have read all of this material, I love them deeply, and I love talking with them. But we can't just keep talking to each other. We have to pick up the phone and call someone we don't know and have a conversation. We need to choose when we're at the restaurant or the bar and we might be sitting down by ourselves to go sit next to someone that we might not have anything in common with, because what we do have is we have our humanity. We have that connection that exists.
So, Myla, we have a couple other questions here that are
absolutely
technical in nature in terms of the limiting of the class, which I can answer, that we have put a cap of 15 on this one because we really wanted to make sure that there could be meaningful dialogue. I think it's likely, just based on where we are, to be in the neighborhood of 12. So for people that are thinking about it, I think it would be a very rich discussion. It also means, though, that you would be part of the class, so to speak. And that was something that we endeavored from the beginning, that reflection part is not only an individual journey, but also shared with others. I have a question here. What does Myla think about people who promote notions of a post-race or post-feminism society? Is this an attempt in your mind to erase these questions from our narratives or something more?
It's a really good question. A really good question. Let me sit with that for just a second. I want to be mindful in my response. I don't think that we can have a post anything until we acknowledge the current, right? So when you do a postmortem on something, it is because something has already occurred. We have not fully interrogated, analyzed, challenged, pushed, uncovered, discovered, recovered from any of these, whether it's feminism, racism, acts against transgender individuals, whatever the topic is that creates an ism. We haven't gotten to the other side of it, so we can't be in post anything. And so until we are willing to actually do the work to understand, uncover, realize, recognize, reflect, we can't get to post. And I'm not interested in being in post until I know that we've done the work to get through, right? And the only way to the post is through. And so I want us to go through that. And what that means, again, is a level of uncomfortability, a level of reckoning with, a level of being ashamed of how we have operated as a country. Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about what the people is, for the people, by the people. The problem isn't with that statement. The problem is with the language of who is the people, right? Who are the people that our forefathers referenced? And so until we can really work through that, and again, I'm not ready to go to post.
So there's a question from Carol Youngman: white people owning our part in this is so important, privilege and power, even if we didn't directly create these systems. Is there a call for action embedded in the coursework? And
it's great.
I know we've talked about this, maybe not as a direct call, but in the same UChicago spirit of we're teaching people how to think, this idea that each person will come potentially to their own action. But yeah, let me let you share more.
Yeah, that's very much what it's about, right? If one person walks out of the class and says, I want to engage differently with the world around me, I want to think more about my power and privilege, that is your action, right? I want to think about how much space I take and create for others. I want to think more about what equity looks like for me. That is your action. My responsibility is not to give all people one call to action, because again, going back to this reference of a journey, if we're all on a different journey, your action is going to look different. I have these times when I facilitate spaces with organizations, and they're very strongly focused on diversity, equity, inclusion. And of course, this is their professional space. But these people are, I'm going to use this word for lack of a better word, but these people are fanatic about it, right? And one thing I will ask them to do is go on your social media, pull out your phone, look at your Instagram, look at your Facebook, whatever social media you use, and look at your pictures. And if you look at your pictures and everyone around you looks like you, probably has the same experience, then are you really steeped in DEI? Are you really steeped in diversity, equity, and inclusion? How do you extend who you are beyond those that are most comfortable for you? It can't just exist at work, right? And so that might be someone's call to action. That doesn't mean go make Black friends, right? That means be very thoughtful about who you engage with, who you have around you, how you want to learn in your whole life, not just by picking up a book. What do you expose yourself to? So if that's someone's call to action, I'm excited about it and I love it. If someone else's call to action is to go back to their organization and say, I really want us to move forward on our DEI journey, here's some things that I think we can do, then I love that call to action. If someone else's is, I just want to learn more, then let's go with that as well.
So we have one more question I'll read, and then I have a final question for you. And I recognize this does not reflect all people of a certain faith, but I will read it as we dutifully do at the Graham School with our open exchange commitment. Chris Chavez writes, but how do you broach the issue of privilege with a white Christian who may see white privilege as God's favor? And, I guess that gets into the general space of how, these are intersectional issues sometimes. and, different forms of privilege kind of sometimes come together in different spaces. And so
Yeah,
anything you want to say on that?
I am happy to. And thank you for asking the question, Seth. Thank you for reading the question. And I'm actually going to go back to Ta-Nehisi Coates on this when he talks about the people. These new people are like us, a modern invention. But unlike us, their name has no real meaning divorced from the machinery of criminal power. The new people were something else before they were white. They were Catholic or Welsh or Mennonite or Jewish. And if all of our national hopes have any fulfillment, then they have to be something else again. And so I think that is a powerful example of this question, right? Is we are all God's favor. Again, whatever your belief is, God or spirituality, Buddha, Allah, etc., it is the belief that humanity is what is most important, right? And so to say that it is white, if we do our readings, white is something that has been attached to people, not that are the actual existence of people. It is language that has been attached to people. It is a construct. It is not actually the definition of who that human is. Again, if you are white, before you were likely Catholic, Welsh, Mennonite, Jewish, and a host of other things. So I would say if it is this idea of white privilege as God's favor, let's really examine what white is and then think about the history of that and actually where God's favor might have initially drawn from.
So I want to close with a question about kind of how you've come to your discernment. We have a lot of different instructional backgrounds at the Graham School. Often when we're having these conversations, people have PhDs and they've studied this in a classroom. You have had a really incredible set of leadership experiences at major nonprofits. You have lived many of the different kind of experiences that you'll be talking about. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to this passion? Because you've been reading these books and deeply absorbing them outside of the kind of formal academic track, even though you're very accomplished educationally in your MBA and other things. And so I'm just curious kind of for you to share a little bit about kind of that journey for you and how that might give you unique perspective that your students will benefit from as they endeavor these books with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, a very vulnerable moment. What you just named, Seth, feeds into a great deal of imposter syndrome for me. And for those of you who aren't really aware of what imposter syndrome it is when you are in a role or doing something and you think people will find you to be a fraud, right? Because you may not have the set of experiences or backgrounds that those who are in that role typically do. I don't have a PhD. I have an MBA that I am very proud of and I worked my tail off for. What I do have, though, is an ability to connect with humans on a human level, right? Like, I think to your point of where does this come from? I grew up in Colorado Springs, Colorado, born and raised in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And if I were to pull out a yearbook and show you the one page of my yearbook, you would see all types of individuals, Black, white, Hispanic, Latino, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And sexual orientation and all things. And then I moved to Chicago about 7 years after that. And I had never experienced segregation like I experienced in Chicago. I had never experienced, and to this day, where you can literally cross over a major thoroughfare and feel like you left one country and are now in a new country. That was jarring for me. It is upsetting for me. It is hurtful for me. I love Black communities. I love Black neighborhoods. I love to hang out with my brothers and sisters in community. I also love to go to the North Side and eat at amazing restaurants by Michelin that are meals are prepared by Michelin level cooks and chefs, right? I don't like walking into those restaurants and still being the only Black person in the entire restaurant. It makes me very uncomfortable, but more than anything, it makes me very sad. And it doesn't make me sad because I feel out of place. It makes me sad because we lose the richness together in community with one another, learning from one another, when we separate and divide ourselves based off of the intention of others, right? And so what do I bring to this? I bring, yes, my lived experience. I've had a lot of opportunity. I talk about my father a lot. My father is a 72-year-old Black man who wears cowboy boots and raised me on Jimi Hendrix, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin. Him and my mother got married to Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven, for goodness sake. And so he is not what one would call the common Black man. But for me, that taught me that there is no common Black man. There is not one thing that is anyone. There are not all white people are this, all Black people are that. That is one thing that I believe deeply, and I think sets me up to do well as an instructor and engage in conversation. The last thing I'll add, Seth, is I don't have a problem saying I don't know, right? I know a lot of things, and I'm proud to know a lot of things, and I don't know a lot of things. And so what I want in this class is for us not to learn from me. I am on my journey as well. I want us to learn together. I want us to take some of these questions that have shown up today and to press one another and figure out how am I making sense of that? What do I believe about that? So that it's not just about Myla. I'm a facilitator of space for a collective learning.
Well, let me just close by saying that we are so grateful, and far from seeing you as an imposter, we see you as the ultimate instructor, because you're bringing to our classrooms a vision and a set of experiences that will enrich us all. And I'll just share that there is no one I think I have learned more from in the last decade than our wonderful time together in dialogue. And so I just hope for all of you that you get that same opportunity. And Myla, thank you for being so generous in so many ways in your spirit and in your incredible wisdom. And yeah, I'm just very proud that we are a school where you'll be teaching this autumn. Thank you all for joining us, and looking forward to continuing these conversations in the week ahead. Hope everyone has a wonderful weekend.